The glass felt like ice shards against my fingertips, each tiny piece a reflection of my shattered life. I was on my knees on the cheap linoleum floor of what used to be my home, trying to salvage the one thing that mattered. The frame was splintered, but the photo inside was somehow intact. Me and Chloe, my 17-year-old sister, squinting into the summer sun at a street fair last year, our smiles wide and genuine. A ghost of a life I no longer recognized. He'd done this. Marco. His rage was a physical presence in the room, clinging to the overturned sofa, the ripped cushions spewing their stuffing like entrails, the shattered plates in the kitchen. He hadn't just broken my things, he'd violated my sanctuary, turning the only safe place I had in the world into a monument of his control. Every broken object was a message. You can't escape me. You belong to me. A sob caught in my throat, thick and painful. He had taken everything, my peace, my security, and now my home. I clutched the photo to my chest, the sharp edges of the broken glass digging into my palm. The physical sting was nothing compared to the cold, suffocating dread that filled my lungs. He would be back. This was just the beginning. This feeling, this absolute powerlessness, is a poison that seeps into your bones and makes you believe you deserve it. I know some of you listening right now might understand that feeling all too well, the sensation of being trapped in a story someone else is writing for you. My story was at its darkest chapter, and I felt so utterly alone, just a whisper against a hurricane. If you've ever felt that way, or if this story is already starting to resonate with that small, fierce part of you that refuses to give up, I would be so grateful if you'd take a moment to subscribe to the channel and like this video. Your support does more than you know. It helps these stories reach others who might need to hear that they aren't alone in their fight. It's a small click, but it sends a powerful message that our voices matter, that our struggles deserve to be seen. Leaving a comment to share your thoughts would mean the world to me. It makes this feel less like screaming into the void and more like sharing a secret with a friend. It's the community we build around these narratives that give them their true strength. I remember seeing him for the first time months before my world imploded. It was a Tuesday night at Vespertine, the kind of upscale Italian restaurant where the lighting is low and the wine list is thicker than a novel. I was just a waitress, another face in a sea of them, trying to stay invisible while balancing trays heavy with lobster risotto and veal ossobuco. Then he walked in, and the entire atmosphere of the room shifted. Dante Moretti. I didn't know his name then, but I knew power when I saw it. It wasn't in the perfect cut of his dark suit or the expensive watch on his wrist. It was in the stillness around him, a pocket of absolute silence and gravity in the bustling dining room. Men twice his age deferred to him with a dip of their heads. The restaurant owner, a man who prided himself on his intimidating bluster, practically melted into the floor. He sat at his usual corner table, a shadow observing the world from behind a mask of cold indifference. His eyes, dark and unreadable, swept across the room, missing nothing. And I felt a primal instinct to avoid that gaze at all costs. He was from a different universe, one made of steel and secrets. That night, my universe collided with his for exactly 90 seconds. I was rushing an order for a notoriously impatient hedge fund manager when my heel caught on the edge of a rug. The tray tilted, a $500 bottle of Barolo sliding precariously toward the floor. I gasped, my hands fumbling, but a larger, stronger hand shot out and stabilized the bottle before it could fall. It was his. Dante Moretti had moved with an impossible, silent speed from his table. "Careful," he said, his voice a low rumble that seemed to vibrate through the floor. It wasn't a criticism or a command. It was a simple, calm statement. His eyes met mine, and for a split second, the cold mask was gone. I didn't see a monster or a kingpin. I saw a profound loneliness, a weariness that seemed ancient. I stammered a thank you, my face burning with embarrassment, but he just gave a slight, almost imperceptible nod and returned to his table as if nothing had happened. The moment was so brief, so insignificant in the grand scheme of his life, that I was sure he'd forgotten it before he even sat down. I, on the other hand, couldn't get the feeling of his steadying hand out of my mind for weeks. Back in the wreckage of my apartment, my phone buzzed with a cruel, jarring sound. It was my manager, Mr. Henderson. I answered, my voice hoarse. "Alara," he started, and I could already hear the strained, apologetic tone he used when delivering bad news. I have to let you go." My blood ran cold. I knew why before he even said it. "Marco called the restaurant," he continued, his voice dropping to a whisper. "He made threats, said you stole from him, that you're unstable. He threatened to cause trouble for our customers. I can't have that, Alara. You understand, my hands are tied." I didn't say anything. I just listened to the final nail being hammered into my coffin. Jobless, homeless. The fabricated debt Marco had invented, the one he used as a leash around my neck, now felt like an insurmountable mountain. He had systematically dismantled my entire life in less than 24 hours. He had isolated me, cut off every escape route, ensuring I had no choice but to crawl back to him. He hadn't just destroyed my apartment, he had torched my future, leaving me with nothing but the ashes. The world outside my broken window kept moving, but my life had just ground to a violent, screeching halt. I sat there for what felt like hours, the silence of the room pressing in on me. The photo of me and Chloe was my only anchor in a sea of despair. Protecting her was the only reason I was still breathing, the only mission that mattered. But how could I protect her now? I had no money, no job, and a monster was hunting me. The thought of her getting caught in the crossfire made me physically ill. My mind raced through impossible scenarios. A bus ticket to a city where no one knew us, a homeless shelter, calling the police. But what would I tell them? That my ex-boyfriend was mad I left him? They wouldn't see the cold, calculated terror in his eyes. They'd see a domestic dispute, a civil matter. They wouldn't understand that men like Marco don't need weapons to destroy you. They do it piece by piece, with fear and isolation, until you forget you ever had a voice. The sun began to set, casting long, ominous shadows across the floor. The cold was seeping deep into my bones when a sharp, authoritative knock echoed from my front door. 3 distinct raps. Not Marco's frantic, angry pounding. This was something else. Something controlled, deliberate, and infinitely more terrifying. My heart hammered against my ribs, a frantic bird trapped in a cage. My first thought was that he'd come back to finish the job. I crept toward the door, my body trembling, and peered through the peephole. It wasn't Marco. Standing in the dimly lit hallway was an older man, maybe in his 50s, with silver hair and a face etched with a kind of weary seriousness. He wore an expensive overcoat and stood perfectly still, flanked by 2 other men who were built like mountains, their dark suits doing little to hide their sheer size. They looked like they belonged on a movie set, not in the hallway of my run-down apartment building. They were dangerous, but it was a different kind of danger. Not the chaotic, explosive rage of Marco, but something colder, more professional, more final. I took a shallow breath and opened the door just a crack, the security chain still in place. The older man's eyes met mine, and they were surprisingly gentle. "Alara, Vance?" he asked, his voice calm and even. I nodded, unable to speak. "My name is Leo," he said, offering a small, sad smile. "Dante Moretti remembers you. He sent us." A wave of disbelief washed over me, so potent it almost buckled my knees. He paused, letting the impossible statement sink in before delivering the final, life-altering words. "He chose you." He chose you. The words hung in the stale, dusty air of my ruined apartment, utterly nonsensical. Chose me for what? A memory flickered. A dropped bottle of wine, a steadying hand, a pair of dark, lonely eyes.
It couldn't be. That was months ago. A fleeting 90-second interaction I was sure he'd never registered. Leo, the silver-haired man at my door, seemed to read the disbelief on my face. "Mr. Moretti doesn't forget a slight," he said, his gaze sweeping over the wreckage of my home, "and he doesn't forget a kindness, no matter how small. He is aware of your situation with Marco Genovese." He spoke Marco's name with a quiet, dismissive contempt that sent a shiver down my spine. This was a level of power I couldn't comprehend. Leo gestured gently toward the hallway. "We're here to take you somewhere safe. Please gather anything you need." My eyes darted around the room. What was there to take? Marco had shattered everything. I looked down at the photo of Chloe and me, still clutched in my hand, its broken glass a testament to my failure. This was all I had left. This was all that mattered. I held it tighter and walked numbly toward the door, leaving the ghost of my life behind. The ride was in a black sedan so luxurious it felt like a different dimension. The leather seats were cool against my skin, and the world outside slid past the tinted windows in a silent, blurry stream of city lights. I was sandwiched between the two mountain-sized men, their presence both terrifying and strangely calming. They didn't speak, didn't even look at me. They were just solid, immovable objects, a living wall between me and the world that wanted to hurt me. Leo sat in the front passenger seat, occasionally speaking in low, clipped Italian into a phone. My mind, however, was a maelstrom of panic. Where were they taking me? What did Dante Moretti want from me? Every horror story I'd ever heard about men like him played on a loop in my head. This had to be a mistake. Or worse, it was a trap, a different kind of cage from the one Marco had built for me. I thought of Chloe, safe for now at our aunt's house, completely unaware that her sister's life had just veered into a dark, uncharted territory. The photo in my hand felt heavier with every passing second, a constant reminder of who I needed to survive for, no matter what came next.
We pulled into a private underground garage and were led to a silent elevator that whisked us upward, my ears popping as we ascended. The doors opened directly into a sprawling penthouse apartment that was less a home and more a monument to wealth and isolation. Floor-to-ceiling windows revealed a breathtaking, godlike view of the entire city glittering below. The furniture was sparse, modern, and impeccably clean, all sharp lines and cold surfaces of glass, steel, and dark wood. It was beautiful, but utterly sterile, like a magazine cover no one had ever actually lived in. And then I saw him. Dante Moretti stood with his back to us, looking out at the city he so clearly owned. He was just as I remembered, dressed in a perfectly tailored dark suit, his posture radiating an aura of absolute, unshakable control. He didn't turn around. He didn't have to. His presence filled the vast space, silencing the air itself. Leo and the two guards melted away with a quiet professionalism that was almost unnerving, leaving me standing alone in the center of the room, a piece of driftwood washed up on the shore of a king's island. My heart pounded a frantic rhythm against my ribs. After a moment that stretched into an eternity, he finally turned. His face was a mask of cold composure, but his eyes, those dark, intense eyes, found mine and held them. There was no flicker of recognition, no warmth, nothing to suggest he remembered the clumsy waitress from his favorite restaurant. He simply assessed me, his gaze so piercing I felt stripped bare. "Ilara Vance," he said, his voice the same low, resonant rumble I remembered, though now it held no trace of kindness. It was the voice of a man accustomed to being obeyed. "Your manager at Vespertine terminated your employment this afternoon. Your landlord served you an eviction notice 2 hours ago. And a lowlife named Marco Genovese is telling anyone who will listen that you owe him $50,000.
He recited the facts of my life's demolition with the detached air of a news anchor reading a teleprompter. Each statement was a hammer blow, reminding me of how utterly and completely I was broken. Humiliation burned in my cheeks. He knew everything. He had seen every crack, every failure, every corner of my pathetic, crumbling world. He was showing me just how powerless I truly was, and just how much power he held. His eyes dropped from my face to my hand, where I was still clutching the broken picture frame so tightly my knuckles were white. For the first time, a flicker of something other than cold indifference crossed his features. It was a deep, chilling anger, but it wasn't directed at me. It was a controlled, silent fury that seemed to lower the temperature of the room. "He did this to your home?" he asked, his voice dangerously quiet. I could only manage a slight nod, my throat too tight to speak. He looked back out the window, his jaw tight. "Men who find their strength by breaking women, they are a plague." The words were spoken with such profound personal venom that it startled me. This wasn't about business. This was about a line that had been crossed. He turned back to me, his expression unreadable again. "You have a sister, Chloe. She's 17. It wasn't a question. He knew. Of course he knew. He was telling me he understood the full scope of my terror, that he saw the one piece of my life that was not negotiable, the one person whose safety was worth any price. And he knew that was the key. He walked over to a sleek, minimalist bar and poured 2 glasses of water, his movements economical and precise. He handed one to me, his fingers brushing mine for a fraction of a second. The brief contact sent a jolt through me, a strange mix of fear and an inexplicable sense of solidity. "Here is my offer," he began, getting straight to the point. "You will live here. This penthouse has a guest wing that will be yours. I will provide for your every need, food, clothing, anything you require. The debt Marco fabricated will be handled. It will cease to exist. More importantly, your sister will be protected. I will have men watching her, ensuring that no one can ever get near her." He laid out a vision of perfect, absolute safety, a fantasy I hadn't even dared to dream of. Then came the price. "In return," he continued, his voice leaving no room for negotiation, "you will remain here. You will not contact anyone from your past life. You will not leave this building unless I am with you or I have approved it. You will live under my protection, which means you will live by my rules. That is the only way I can guarantee your safety." My breath hitched. The words echoed Marco's possessiveness, his need for control, and a raw, instinctual fear flared up inside me. "I can't," I whispered, the words tasting like ash. "Thank you for the offer, Mr. Moretti, but I can't be a prisoner. I just escaped one cage. I won't willingly walk into another, no matter how gilded it is." I looked him straight in the eye, trying to project a strength I didn't feel. "I appreciate what your men did, bringing me here, but I can't accept. I'll figure it out on my own. I always have." Even as I said it, I knew it was a lie. I had nothing. I was at the end of my rope. But the thought of handing over what little autonomy I had left to another powerful man was suffocating.
I had to believe I could still save myself, that I wasn't just an object to be passed from one owner to another. The silence that followed my declaration was heavy and absolute, and I felt my fragile bravado begin to crumble under the weight of his unblinking stare. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't mock my pathetic attempt at defiance. He simply took a slow sip of his water, his eyes never leaving mine. "On your own?" he repeated, the question soft but sharp as a razor's edge. "You have no money, no job, and no home. You have a man hunting you who enjoys inflicting pain, and he believes you are his property. He will not stop. When he finds you, and he will make what he did to your apartment look like an act of kindness." Each word was a cold, hard truth that chipped away at my denial. He took a step closer, his presence overwhelming. And when he grows tired of hurting you, he will go after the one person you care about more than yourself. He will find your sister, Alara. Do you truly believe your pride is worth more than her life? He had weaponized my love for Chloe, aiming it directly at my heart. It was a calculated, brutal move, and it was devastatingly effective. Tears of rage and helplessness burned my eyes. He was right. He knew he was right. He had left me with no choice at all. The fight drained out of me in one long, shuddering exhale. I looked from his impassive face down to the smiling faces in the photograph, Chloe's bright, innocent eyes staring back at me. She was my world. Her safety was the only thing that had ever mattered. Surrendering to this man felt like a betrayal of myself, but letting Marco get anywhere near my sister would be a sin beyond forgiveness. I lifted my head, meeting Dante's gaze. The decision was made. "I'll stay," I said, my voice barely a whisper. The words felt like shackles locking into place. Leo materialized silently at my side, as if summoned by my surrender. "I will show you to your rooms, Miss Vance," he said, his tone gentle. I followed him numbly across the polished marble floor, feeling like a ghost. As we reached the hallway leading to the guest wing, Dante's voice cut through the silence, stopping me in my tracks. "Alara," he said. I turned. He was standing in the same spot, a dark silhouette against the sea of city lights. "This is not a cage," he stated, his voice firm and clear. "It is a fortress. The difference is that in a fortress, the monsters are kept on the outside." The guest wing Dante had given me was larger than my entire stolen life. It was a suite of rooms, decorated in shades of cream and gray, so pristine and silent it felt like living inside a photograph. I woke that first morning tangled in sheets softer than anything I had ever touched, the silence so absolute it was louder than the city traffic I was used to. The weight of my decision pressed down on me, a physical thing in the sterile air. In the closet, I found clothes. Not just clothes, but outfits, perfectly my size, from soft sweaters to simple dresses and jeans, all new, with the tags discreetly removed. It was a gesture of profound care and, at the same time, a chilling display of his reach. He knew my shoe size, he knew my measurements. It was another reminder that while this was a fortress, its walls were built of his knowledge and his power. And I was just a resident, not a partner. I walked through the silent rooms, my hand trailing one to cold marble countertops, feeling like a ghost, haunting a life that was not mine. The rules were unspoken but clear. This was my space, and the rest of the penthouse was his. The safety was real, but so was the invisible line I was not meant to cross. Dante found me later that day, standing before the vast wall of glass in the main living area, watching the city move below, a world I was no longer part of. He was as formal and remote as ever, his presence sucking the warmth from the room. "I've made arrangements for your sister," he said, his voice a low, even tone. "She will be watched, discreetly. 2 of my best men will follow her to and from school. They have been instructed not to make contact unless absolutely necessary." A wave of relief so potent it made me dizzy was immediately followed by a sharp sting of resentment. "Watched?" I asked, turning to face him. "Or spied on?" The challenge hung in the air between us. His eyes, dark and unreadable, narrowed slightly. "They are there to ensure she remains untouched by the consequences of another man's actions," he stated, his voice dropping, leaving no room for debate. "The debt Marco Genovese claimed you owed has been resolved." He said it with the casual finality of a god erasing a mortal's mistake. My heart hammered. "What did you do to him?" I whispered. He held my gaze. It was handled. The deliberate vagueness was more terrifying than any brutal confession could ever be. The days that followed fell into a strange, dislocated rhythm. Dante was a phantom in his own home.
leaving before I woke and returning long after the sun had set, a dark suit and a tired expression the only evidence he lived there at all. Yet his presence was everywhere. The kitchen, which I had tentatively begun to use, was suddenly stocked with my favorite brand of tea, with fresh berries, and the specific type of dark chocolate I used to buy myself as a rare treat. Small, silent gestures of a man who paid attention to details others missed.
One evening, he left a small, heavy box on my nightstand. Inside was a simple, elegant silver frame, perfectly sized for the photo of Chloe and me. No note, no explanation. Later that week, a nightmare about Marco, his hands, his voice, tore me from my sleep. I woke up gasping, my heart pounding, to find Dante standing in the doorway of my room. He didn't speak, just held out a glass of water. I took it, my hand trembling. "You're safe here," he said, his voice a quiet rumble in the darkness, before he turned and disappeared, leaving me with the first undeniable crack in his armor of ice. Despite the safety, a feeling of uselessness began to gnaw at me. I was a bird in a gilded cage, fed and protected, but with nothing to do but watch the world go by. I couldn't accept it. I started cleaning my own rooms, refusing the silent, efficient housekeeping staff. I cooked for myself. The simple act of chopping vegetables and stirring a pot, a small rebellion against the passive existence he had designed for me. One night, he came home earlier than usual, looking bone-weary, the lines around his eyes etched deeper than I'd ever seen them. I had made a simple lentil soup, the aroma filling the vast, sterile kitchen with a hint of warmth. On impulse, I ladled some into a bowl. "You should eat something," I said, my voice sounding small in the cavernous space. He stopped, his expression a mixture of surprise and suspicion. "I have staff for that," he said, his tone polite but firm, erecting a wall between us. I felt a flush of anger and humiliation. "I'm not your staff," I shot back, my voice trembling slightly. "I was just trying to be a person, not a possession you're storing on a shelf." The accusation hung in the air, sharp and undeniable, and for a long moment he just stared at me before turning away without a word. My first real glimpse into the politics of my situation came not from Dante, but from Leo. He would visit occasionally to give me updates on Chloe, his paternal presence a small comfort in my isolation. During one of his visits, a man I'd never seen before entered the living area. He was older than Dante, with a face like carved granite and cold, dismissive eyes. This, I would learn, was Russo, one of Dante's senior captains. He looked at me not as a person, but as a problem, his gaze sweeping over me with undisguised contempt. He began speaking to Leo in rapid, harsh Italian, but his meaning was universal. He gestured toward me, his words dripping with scorn. "La ragazza," the girl. He saw me as a distraction, a liability, a foolish sentimentality his boss could not afford. Leo responded in a low, calm voice, his words a clear defense of Dante's decision, but the tension was thick enough to taste. After Russo stormed out, Leo offered a weary apology. "Not everyone in our world understands loyalty that extends beyond business," he explained. It was then I truly understood. My presence here wasn't just a private arrangement. It was a move on a chessboard I couldn't even see, and it had made Dante vulnerable to his own men. The fortress was breached not by force, but from a flower. A delivery arrived one afternoon, a large, opulent bouquet of black roses. Leo, who happened to be there, intercepted the box before it could be brought to my rooms. His expression tightened as he lifted the lid. The flowers were flawless, their dark petals velvety and perfect, a funereal elegance that made my stomach clench. Tucked inside was a small white card. It was addressed to me. Leo pulled it out, his face becoming a grim, stony mask as he read the single typewritten line. He tried to hide it, but I saw the words over his shoulder. "He can't hide you forever. Pretty things break." There was no signature, no name, just a cold, clean threat that felt infinitely more personal and sinister than Marco's brute rage. This was calculated. This was a message from a different kind of predator, someone who understood the power of psychological warfare. Leo immediately turned away, pulling out his phone and speaking in low, urgent tones. The invisible walls of my sanctuary had just crumbled to dust. The monsters weren't just on the outside anymore, they had my address. When Dante returned that evening, the air in the penthouse was thick with a new, dangerous energy. Leo met him at the door, handing him the small white card. I watched from a distance as Dante read the words. His reaction was the most terrifying thing I had ever witnessed. He didn't explode, he didn't shout. Instead, a profound stillness fell over him, a chilling vacuum where all emotion used to be. His face became an expressionless mask of lethal intent, his eyes turning as hard and cold as black ice. The fury radiating from him was a palpable force, silent and absolute. He walked directly to me, his gaze sweeping over my face, my arms, as if physically checking for damage. "Are you all right?" he asked, his voice deceptively soft, yet vibrating with a barely contained violence. I could only nod. He then walked to a heavy crystal ashtray, lit the corner of the card with his lighter, and watched him passively as the threat turned to black, curling ash. "This will not happen again," he said, not to me, but to the room, to the world. It wasn't a promise, it was a vow written in blood. Within the hour, the number of silent, dark-suited men guarding the building had doubled. The next day, Leo explained the new reality to me, his voice grave. Marco, it turned out, was little more than an errand boy, a bottom feeder connected to a much larger and more disciplined rival organization, the Falcone family. By erasing Marco and his fabricated debt, Dante hadn't just solved my problem, he had directly challenged their authority, violating an unspoken code of territorial respect. They interpreted his protection of me as a strategic move, a public declaration of ownership over something or someone they considered theirs. "They aren't trying to get to you because of who you are," Leo said, his words both a comfort and a curse. "They are doing it because of who you are to him. They see you as his possession, and by threatening you, they are testing his strength, looking for a weakness to exploit." The horrifying truth settled in my stomach like a stone. I was no longer just Alara Vance, a waitress in trouble. I had become a pawn in a silent, deadly war between kings, a symbol of Dante Moretti's power. My safety was now inextricably linked to his reputation, and my life was the battleground. The test came sooner and more brutally than anyone expected. It wasn't another note or a veiled threat. It was a direct, terrifying action. Chloe was walking home from her after-school art class, the two men Dante had assigned trailing a discreet half-block behind her. A black van, nondescript and windowless, screeched to a halt beside her on the quiet suburban street. Two men in dark hoodies jumped out, their movements fast and purposeful as they lunged toward my sister. Dante's men reacted with inhuman speed, a blur of motion as they closed the distance and intercepted the attackers before they could lay a single hand on her. The ensuing fight was short, vicious, and brutally efficient. The would-be kidnappers were left broken on the pavement, but the message had been delivered with chilling clarity. Leo's call came while Dante and I were in the living room. I watched as Dante's face turned to granite, his knuckles white as he gripped his phone. He hung up and turned to me, and for the first time since I had met him, I saw a flicker of raw, undisguised fear in his eyes. It wasn't for himself. It was for me. "They went for Chloe," he said, his voice a low, guttural promise of the war to come. The immediate aftermath was a blur of controlled chaos. Dante's voice on the phone became a low, lethal weapon, spitting out commands in rapid Italian. He hung up, and his eyes, when they met mine, were stripped of all their usual composure. They were raw, burning with a cold fire I had never seen before. "They know who she is to you," he stated, the words a shard of ice in the silent room. This was a test, to see if I would flinch. He led me into the core of the penthouse, to a room I hadn't known existed.
A heavy steel door, disguised as a paneled wall, hissed open to reveal a small, self-contained suite, a panic room. It was furnished simply, but had its own air supply, communications, and supplies. You and your sister will stay here until I am certain this building is secure again, he commanded. He wasn't asking. He was walling us in, locking away the only part of his life that had become a liability. The fortress wasn't just a place anymore. It was a state of being, and I was its most precious, most vulnerable prisoner. The fear I felt wasn't for myself, but for the realization that my very existence had painted a target on the back of the one person I would die to protect. The decision was made without my input, a swift, brutal calculation of risk. Chloe can't stay at your aunt's house any longer, Dante announced, his back to me as he stared out at the city, his hands clenched into fists at his sides. It's not secure. I'm bringing her here. My breath caught in my throat. Here? Into the heart of the storm? The idea was both a profound relief and a source of absolute terror. Having her close, where I could see she was safe, was a fantasy I hadn't dared to entertain. But bringing her into this world, into Dante Moretti's gilded cage, felt like a contamination. I was tainting her innocent life with the darkness that now clung to mine. Dante, you can't, I pleaded, my voice trembling. This is your world, not hers. She's just a child. He turned, and the look on his face was one of grim finality. And because she is a child, and because she is your sister, she is the perfect weapon for them to use against me. The only place I can guarantee her safety is right here, under my own roof. Leo is already on his way to get her. There was no arguing. The invisible line between my life and my sister's had just been erased, and we were now both sinking into his dangerous, all-consuming orbit. Chloe arrived 2 hours later, her eyes wide with a mixture of awe and confusion as she took in the marble floors and the breathtaking city view. She clutched her worn backpack to her chest, a small, vibrant splash of color in the monochrome perfection of Dante's world. Dante, for his part, seemed utterly at a loss. He stood stiffly by the window, a king in his castle suddenly faced with a subject he didn't know how to rule, a 17-year-old girl. "Welcome," he said, his voice a low rumble that sounded more like a formal decree than a greeting. Chloe, bless her heart, was unfazed. She walked right up to him, a curious smile on her face. "So you're the scary Mafia boss my sister got mixed up with," she said, her tone more curious than accusatory.
"You're not as tall as I pictured." A flicker of something, shock, maybe even amusement, crossed Dante's face before he masked it. "Your room is this way," he said, gesturing down the hall, clearly eager to retreat to familiar territory. But for a brief, shining moment, I saw him not as a powerful crime lord, but as just a man, momentarily disarmed by the unflinching honesty of a teenage girl. The tension in my own shoulders eased, just a fraction. That night, sleep was an impossibility. I found myself in the darkened living room, staring at the glittering, indifferent city lights. The weight of it all, Chloe's presence, the escalating danger, the suffocating gratitude I felt toward a man I barely knew, was crushing me. I didn't hear him approach, but suddenly he was there, a dark shadow in the moonlight. He didn't speak for a long time, just stood beside me, sharing the silence. "I'm sorry," I whispered finally, the words thick with unshed tears. "I'm sorry I brought all this into your life." He turned his head, his profile sharp and severe against the glass. "You brought nothing," he said, his voice quiet but intense. "They did. There is a difference." He paused, and when he spoke again, his voice was different, laced with a distant, ancient pain. "When I was 10, my father made a promise to a rival that he couldn't keep, a business deal. The man retaliated by going after my mother. He didn't succeed, but I saw the fear in her eyes. I learned that day that in my world, love is a weapon your enemies will always aim at you. He was giving me a piece of his history, a key to the locks around his heart, and I understood.
He wasn't just protecting me, he was trying to right a wrong that had haunted him his entire life. The Falcone family did not take the insult of their failed kidnapping attempt lying down. Their response was swift, public, and designed to send a clear message. They didn't come for the penthouse again. Instead, they hit Dante where his public image lived. A car bomb was detonated outside Vespertine during the peak of dinner service. The explosion shattered the elegant facade of the restaurant, turning the place where I had first seen him, the symbol of his legitimate power, into a scene of chaos and fire. News reports flooded the airwaves. Leo brought the information to Dante on a tablet, his face grim. Dante watched the footage of flames engulfing the entrance, his expression unreadable, but a muscle in his jaw twitched violently. This was a declaration of war. It was the Falcones telling him, and the entire city, that his sentimentality had made him weak, that his fortress had cracks they could exploit. He stood up, his movements precise and deadly. "Stay with them," he ordered Leo, his eyes locking onto mine for a split second. "Secure this floor. No one in or out." Then he was gone, a storm of controlled fury heading out to meet the fire his enemies had started, leaving us behind in the suffocating silence of the aftermath. The illusion of the penthouse as an impenetrable fortress lasted less than an hour after Dante left. It happened with a terrifying, coordinated silence. The power flickered once, then died, plunging the entire floor into an emergency-lit darkness. The communication lines went dead. Leo, his face a mask of cold fury, drew a weapon from an ankle holster I never knew he had. "They're inside the building," he said, his voice a low, urgent whisper. Someone on the inside let them in. My blood ran cold. Russo, the captain who saw me as a cancer in their organization. Had he betrayed his boss to prove a point? There was no time to think. Leo pushed Chloe and me toward the guest wing. "Barricade the door. Do not open it for anyone but me or Dante. Do you understand?" I nodded, my heart pounding against my ribs. I grabbed Chloe's hand, her fingers cold and trembling in mine, and pulled her into my suite. We shoved a heavy dresser against the door, the sound of scraping wood deafening in the eerie silence. We were trapped. The monsters were no longer on the outside. They were in the hallways, and they were hunting us. My role as a protected ward had just ended. I was now the only thing standing between my sister and them. Crouched in the darkness of my bedroom closet, Chloe's terrified sobs muffled against my shoulder, I listened to the sounds of the invasion. Heavy footsteps in the hallway, the splintering of wood as they broke through the main living area. They were methodical, searching. My mind raced, fueled by a primal, protective fire I didn't know I possessed. I remembered a small service hatch in the back of the closet, one I'd noticed when I first arrived, leading to a narrow maintenance crawl space between the walls. It was a desperate, insane idea. "Chloe, listen to me," I whispered, my voice shaking but firm. "We're going in there, now." We scrambled through the hatch just as the bedroom door crashed open. We held our breath, huddled in the dusty, cramped darkness, as a man's voice called out my name, a sing-song threat that curdled my blood. Then, from the hallway, came a different sound, a single, muffled gunshot, followed by a heavy thud. And then, Dante's voice, raw and guttural, shouting my name, "Alara." It wasn't a question, it was a prayer, a desperate, ragged plea ripped from the depths of his soul. I pushed the hatch open and stumbled out into the ruined room, directly into his path. He saw me, and the world stopped.
The lethal predator vanished, replaced by a man looking at the wreckage of his worst fear. His eyes, wild and frantic, swept over me, then found Chloe huddled behind me. He crossed the distance in 2 long strides, and his hands came up to frame my face, his thumbs brushing away tears I didn't even know I was crying. He was checking for injuries, his touch both desperate and exquisitely gentle. "Are you hurt?" he rasped, his voice thick with an emotion so raw it felt like I was touching a live wire. I shook my head, unable to speak. The relief that washed over his face was so profound it seemed to physically weaken him. He pulled me against his chest, his arms wrapping around me in a crushing embrace that wasn't about possession or control, but about anchoring himself to the fact that I was alive. He buried his face in my hair, and I felt a shudder rack his entire body. "They came for you," he whispered, the words a broken confession against my skin. "They did this because you are mine." It wasn't a claim of ownership. It was an admission of catastrophic love, a truth that now lay exposed between us, shining like a beacon for our enemies to see. We were no longer just a man and a woman in a dangerous situation. We were a vulnerability, a liability, and an irreversible, unbreakable bond. The aftermath was a landscape of controlled violence. Dante's men moved through the penthouse with a chilling, silent efficiency, securing the perimeter and assessing the damage. The bodies of the intruders were gone before Chloe could even see them, spirited away into the hidden machinery of Dante's world. But the evidence of their presence remained in the splintered door frames and the overturned furniture. The worst of it was Leo. I found him in the main hallway, propped against a wall, his face pale and slick with sweat. A dark, ugly stain was spreading across the side of his pristine white shirt, just below his ribs. He had been shot. He'd taken a bullet meant for us, for me. He tried to offer a weak, reassuring smile, but it was a grimace of pain. Dante knelt beside him, his voice a low, urgent command as he applied pressure to the wound. "Stay with me, old man," he murmured, his voice cracking with an emotion I had never heard before. Seeing Leo, the kind, paternal man who had been my bridge to this world, bleeding on the marble floor, shattered something inside me. This was my fault. Every drop of his blood felt like my own personal sin, a debt I could never repay. This was the price of my safety. The confirmation of the betrayal came an hour later, delivered by Dante in a voice as cold and hard as the glass wall he stared through. It was Russo. He had disabled the security systems from a remote terminal and given the Falcones a 5-minute window to breach the building. He had sold us out, using my presence as the justification for his treachery. He told them I had gone soft, Dante said, his reflection in the glass a mask of contained fury. That bringing you here, protecting you, was a weakness, an emotional liability they could exploit to tear down everything my father built. He wasn't looking at me, but I felt the weight of his words like a physical blow. A liability, a weakness, that's what I was. I wasn't a person he was protecting. I was a strategic error, a fatal flaw in his armor that his own men were using against him. Russo hadn't just betrayed Dante, he had proven that my worst fears were true. I was a contagion, a walking disaster who brought ruin to anyone who tried to help me. The safety of this fortress had been an illusion, and I was the key that had unlocked the door for the monsters. The guilt was no longer a feeling, it was a certainty, a cold, hard fact etched into the reality of Leo's blood on the floor. Dante's transformation was terrifying to behold. The quiet, lonely man who had left a new picture frame on my nightstand and brought me water after a nightmare was gone, completely consumed by the cold, ruthless king his enemies feared. He moved through the penthouse like a caged panther, his energy a vortex of lethal intent that sucked all the air from the room. His phone calls were short, brutal, and spoken in a dialect of Italian so harsh it sounded like he was spitting stones. I didn't need to understand the words to know he was ordering retaliation on a scale that would scorch the earth. He was declaring a war without terms, without mercy. When he finally looked at me, his eyes were black holes, devoid of the warmth I had just begun to recognize. "No one will ever threaten my home again," he vowed, his voice a low, chilling promise. I realized then that I hadn't just brought danger to his door. I had awakened the monster he kept so carefully chained in the dungeons of his soul. He was doing this for me, for my protection, but in doing so, he was becoming the very thing I had once feared. I was the catalyst for his descent,
and the thought that my safety could only be bought with so much violence and rage was a horror I could not bear. That night, he found me in the kitchen, staring blankly at the silver frame that now held the photo of me and Chloe. He came to stand beside me, the silence between us heavy with unspoken grief and impending violence. "Leo will be fine," he said, his voice softer than it had been all day, a fragile echo of the man he was before the attack. "The doctor said the bullet went clean through."
He's a stubborn old wolf. He was trying to comfort me, but his words only twisted the knife of my guilt deeper. I was the reason Leo had a bullet wound at all. "This has to stop, Dante," I whispered, my voice trembling. "This war, Russo, the Falcones, it's all because of me. You have to see that." He turned to face me, his expression hardening again. "This is not because of you. This is because they are animals, and they need to be put down." He didn't understand. He saw it as a problem to be solved with force, an equation to be balanced with blood. He couldn't see that he was pouring gasoline on a fire to put it out, and I was the spark that started it all. If I stayed, this would never end. He would burn down the entire city to keep me safe, and in the process, he would burn himself to ashes. I couldn't let that happen. I had to be the one to end it. The decision to leave was the hardest thing I had ever done. It felt like tearing out my own heart, a betrayal of the safety he had so fiercely given me. While Chloe slept in the other room, safe for now under the watch of Dante's most loyal men, I packed a small, pathetic bag with a few of the clothes he had bought me. It felt like theft. I found a piece of paper and a pen, and my hand shook as I wrote the note. I told him I was grateful, that he had saved my life in more ways than one. I told him I was leaving to give him his life back, to take the target off his back. I told him I was sorry. I folded the note and placed it on my pillow, a final, silent surrender. The most agonizing part was leaving Chloe. For a moment, I considered waking her, taking her with me. But where would we go? Back to the streets, where the Falcones or what was left of Marco's crew would find us in a day? No. The only way to truly save her was to leave her in the one place in the world I knew she would be protected. I had to trust that Dante's code, his promise, extended beyond me. I crept into her room, kissed her forehead as she slept, and whispered a promise that I would come back for her when it was safe. It was a lie, and it tasted like poison. Slipping out of the penthouse was an act of quiet treason. I waited until the darkest hour of the morning when the guards changed shifts, creating a brief 30-second window of potential distraction. Dante was in his office, consumed by the logistics of his impending war, his focus entirely on the enemy outside. He never imagined the threat was already inside, packing a bag and preparing to flee. I used a service elevator I had seen the cleaning staff use, my heart hammering against my ribs with every silent floor we descended. The air in the underground garage was cold and smelled of gasoline and concrete. I felt exposed, vulnerable, a ghost slipping through the cracks of a fortress. As I stepped out onto the pre-dawn city street, the noise and the grime of the world I had left behind crashed over me like a tidal wave. The city lights, once a beautiful, distant tapestry from Dante's window, were now harsh and menacing up close. I have no money, no phone, and no destination. I was just a girl on a street corner, utterly alone. I had escaped the gilded cage, but in doing so, I had thrown myself back into the wilderness, where the wolves were waiting, and this time there would be no one to save me. Dante found the note on my pillow just as the sun began to rise, casting a cold, gray light into the empty room. He had gone to check on him, a rare moment of quiet concern in the midst of his storm of rage, only to find the bed unslept in and the closet half empty. He read my words, each sentence a carefully chosen blade to sever our connection,
to absolve him of his self-imposed duty. He didn't shout. He didn't break anything. The fury that had been simmering within him all night didn't explode. It imploded, collapsing inward until all that was left was a vast, hollow emptiness. He walked through the silent penthouse, a king in a conquered castle, his victory over the invaders rendered utterly meaningless. He had kept the monsters out, but he had failed to understand the prisoner inside. He had built a fortress to protect me from the world, and in the end, it was the fortress itself I had needed to escape. He stood before the great glass window, looking down at the city that was his kingdom, now a sprawling, hostile territory that had swallowed me whole. The war wasn't over. He had simply lost the only thing worth fighting for before the first real battle had even begun. The cold reality of the city street was a slap in the face. For 2 days, I had been a ghost, moving through the underbelly of a world I never asked to know, fueled by stale coffee and the burning, desperate need for a plan. Running blindly was a death sentence. I had to stop being the pawn and learn the rules of the game. I remembered Marco, in one of his drunken, boastful rants, mentioning a name, a man named Sal, a bookkeeper who handled the dirty money for half the low-level criminals in the city, including the Falcones. It was a pathetic, flimsy thread, but it was the only one I had. My new mission wasn't just to survive, it was to find leverage. I needed something real, something tangible that I could use to trade for my sister's permanent safety and to cut the strings that tied me to Dante's war.
I found a cheap burner phone and a room in a hostel that asked no questions, the thin mattress a world away from the silken sheets of my gilded cage. The fear was still there, a constant cold knot in my stomach, but for the first time, it was accompanied by something else, a sliver of steely, determined purpose. I was no longer running from something. I was running toward an endgame. From the anonymous safety of a public library, I began to dig. While my hands typed, searching for any digital footprint left by Sal the bookkeeper, my heart ached with a phantom pain. I missed the suffocating safety of the penthouse, the quiet rumble of Dante's voice, the impossible feeling of being seen. I felt his absence like a missing limb. My self-imposed exile was a constant, sharp agony, a choice that felt more wrong with every passing hour. A news alert popped up on the screen, and my blood ran cold. A series of coordinated, catastrophic accidents had befallen key Falcone businesses overnight. A warehouse fire, a shipping container lost at sea, an armored car hijacking executed with military precision. There were no witnesses, no suspects, just whispers of a ghost. It was him. Dante wasn't just sitting in his tower mourning my departure. He was waging a silent, scorched earth war, dismantling his enemies with the cold, brutal strategy of a master tactician. This wasn't just business. It was personal. He was tearing down their empire brick by brick, a rampage fueled by my note, and I knew with a sickening certainty that he wouldn't stop until the entire city was ashes, or I was back within his walls. My desperate search yielded a bitter fruit. I found him, not Sal, but a digital trail he'd carelessly left behind, a series of encrypted payments from a Falcone shell corporation to a private account, an account belonging to Russo. The proof was right there on the screen, a cold, hard line of data connecting Dante's trusted captain to the very people trying to destroy him. My hands shook as I printed the single sheet of paper, the ink still warm against my cold fingers. This was it. This was the weapon I needed, the truth that could end the war from the inside. But as I stepped out of the library and back into the grimy afternoon light, a chill that had nothing to do with the weather washed over me. A sleek black town car slid to a silent stop at the curb beside me. The back door opened, and Russo stepped out, his face a mask of cold, triumphant satisfaction. He had found me. "You just couldn't stay away, could you?" he said,
his voice laced with contempt. "Some things are better left buried, little girl. You were his weakness, and now you're going to be his ruin." He saw the paper clutched in my hand, and a cruel smile touched his lips. He thought he was just cleaning up a loose end. He didn't give me a chance to speak or to bargain. He was a man who had already made his decision, convinced of his own righteousness. "I'm going to give Falcone the one thing he wants more than territory," Russo sneered, his hand gripping my arm in a painfully tight grasp. "I'm going to give him the Mafia boss's girl. It's a peace offering. I'll be the one who ended the war you started." The sheer arrogance of his betrayal was stunning. He wasn't just a traitor, he was a zealot, convinced he was saving the organization from the sentimentality Dante had shown me. I fought back, a surge of pure adrenaline giving me a strength I didn't know I had. I kicked, I scratched, I screamed, using every dirty trick I'd learned from a life of being underestimated. For a moment, I actually surprised him, but he was stronger, more ruthless. He shoved me hard into the back of the car, the door slamming shut with a sound of absolute finality. As the car peeled away from the curb, I did the only thing I could. I let the folded piece of paper, the proof of his treason, slip from my fingers and flutter to the grimy pavement. A tiny, hopeless prayer sent out into the indifferent city, a final, desperate message in a bottle. The warehouse smelled of rust, damp concrete, and despair. I was bound to a metal chair in the center of a vast, empty space, the single bare bulb above casting long, menacing shadows. Across from me sat Antonio Falcone, a man whose placid, grandfatherly face was completely at odds with the dead emptiness in his eyes. Russo stood beside him, a loyal dog finally being praised by a new master. They were savoring the moment, explaining in chilling detail how they would use me to break Dante, to force him to his knees before they ended him. They spoke of Chloe, of what they would do to her once I was gone, and a rage so pure and white-hot burned away my fear. Just as Falcone leaned in, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper, the massive steel doors at the far end of the warehouse didn't just open, they imploded inward in a deafening shriek of torn metal. Standing in the swirling dust and chaos was Dante. He wasn't flanked by an army. Leo was at his side, arm in a sling but eyes blazing, along with two other men. They moved like shadows, a four-man apocalypse. Dante's eyes found mine, and in that single, searing glance, I saw it all. The agony of my absence, the fury of his hunt, and the terrifying, unconditional promise of his return. He had come for me. The ensuing chaos was a symphony of brutal efficiency. Dante and his men moved through Falcone's guards, not like men, but like a force of nature. In the midst of the maelstrom, Russo saw his victory slipping away and made a final, desperate play. He lunged for me, pulling me from the chair and holding a sharp blade to my throat, using me as a human shield. "Stop," he screamed, his voice cracking with panic. "Or she dies. Choose, Moretti. Her or all of this." He was forcing the impossible choice, the one I had run away to prevent. Dante froze, the cold fury on his face warring with a raw, naked fear. He slowly, deliberately lowered his weapon, the sound of it clattering on the concrete an echo of his surrender. In that moment of absolute silence, I looked at the man holding me, the traitor who believed love was a weakness. "He chose me," I whispered, not to Dante, but to Russo, my voice filled with a strange, calm pity. "It's something you'll never understand." The words, a simple statement of fact, hit him harder than any bullet. He faltered, his grip loosening for a single, fatal heartbeat. It was all the opening Dante needed. A precise shot from Leo's weapon sent the knife spinning away. The threat was over. Dante rushed to me, his hands framing my face as he searched my eyes. "Never again," he breathed, a vow against my skin. "Don't ever leave me again." I leaned into his touch, the fortress and the prisoner finally becoming a home. "I won't," I promised. The silence that followed the storm was a strange, heavy thing. It wasn't empty. It was filled with the ghosts of what had happened and the quiet hum of a new beginning. The news reports never used names like Falcone or Russo, speaking only of a sudden and catastrophic collapse of a powerful business consortium due to internal strife. Dante never spoke of it again, but the finality of his actions hung in the air. Russo had vanished into the same dark machinery that had swallowed Marco, a footnote in a war I had inadvertently started. Leo, recovering with a stubborn grace in a guest room that had been converted into a temporary infirmary, would simply pat my hand and say, "The trash took itself out." I spent those first few days not hiding, but helping. I organized the household, I sat with Leo and read to him, and I began to feel the shape of the space around me not as a cage, but as a home I was helping to mend. Dante would watch me sometimes, a quiet, unreadable expression on his face, as if seeing me for the first time not as a liability to be protected, but a force of calm holding the center of his world together. A few weeks later, Dante took me to the skeleton of what used to be Vesperitine. The elegant facade was a blackened ruin, a monument to the war fought in my name. I expected him to be grim, but instead he turned to me, a blueprint clutched in his hand. "They tried to burn down a symbol of my power," he said, his voice a low rumble against the city noise. "I want to rebuild it as a symbol of our future." He unrolled the plans on the hood of his car, showing me a design that was sleek and modern, much like his penthouse. I traced the cold, sharp lines with my finger. "It's beautiful," I said, "but it's not you. Not the you I'm starting to know. It needs warmth, more light, a place where people feel safe, not intimidated." A slow smile, a rare and brilliant thing, touched his lips. "Show me," he said, handing me a pen. And just like that, I was no longer a spectator in his life. I was an architect of our new one, sketching out plans for a future where Chloe could paint in the sunlight streaming through a window, completely and utterly safe, her laughter the only sound that mattered. The penthouse itself began to transform, shedding its sterile skin. Chloe's vibrant, chaotic artwork now adorned the minimalist walls, and my books found a home on shelves that had once been empty. It was no longer a monument to isolation. It was a home, loud and messy and alive. One evening, as Chloe chattered away about her art school scholarship, an anonymous donation, of course, Dante came to stand behind me as I washed dishes. He didn't speak, but gently took my hand, drying it with a soft towel. He then slid something onto my ring finger. It wasn't a diamond. It was a heavy gold signet ring bearing the Moretti family crest. I started to pull back, the old fear of possession flaring up. "It's not a claim," he said, his voice quiet and firm, his eyes holding mine. "It's a key. It means you belong here, not to me, but with me. It means this is your family now, and no one in my world will ever dare to question that you have a right to be safe under its protection." He closed my fingers over it, his touch a promise of a future I never thought I'd have, a silent vow that the monsters were gone for good. 6 months later, we sat at the best table in the new Vesperitine, a restaurant reborn from the ashes. It was my design, filled with warm light, soft textures, and the quiet buzz of happy people. Our photograph, the one of me and Chloe squinting in the summer sun, sat in its silver frame on a shelf behind the bar, a silent guardian watching our new life. Dante held my hand across the table, the signet ring a comfortable weight on my finger. He no longer looked like a king observing his subjects from a shadowed corner. He looked like a man at home, his eyes, once so cold and lonely, now warm, as they followed Chloe, who was confidently showing the pastry chef her latest designs. The journey from that shattered apartment floor felt like a lifetime ago. I had been a girl drowning in a world of other people's making, and now I was a woman who had helped build her own safe harbor. He had chosen me, yes, but in the end, I had also chosen him, and together we had chosen this life. It's a peace I hope everyone finds. Thank you for letting me share my story with you. Knowing it might reach someone else who feels lost in the storm makes all the difference.